Good afternoon and welcome to the EVGen Pharma PLC post-AGM presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, attendees are being listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged, can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Simply click Q&A, scroll to the bottom, type your question and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question submitted today. However, all questions will be reviewed and with prompt responses published on the Investor Meet Company platform where appropriate to do so. I'd now like to hand you over to Richard Molson, CFO, and Dr. Hugh Jones, CEO. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Paul, and hello everybody from our head office here in Alderley Park in Cheshire. We're going to bring you up to date on our mission to really harness the power of sulforaphane, a very biologically active agent. And we'll start with the usual disclaimer. As everybody knows, we're a public company, so the normal rules apply. And to remind you what we are and what we do, we are a clinical stage drug development company. We focus on a number of cancers that you can see on screen. And three molecular targets of great interest to us are highly relevant in differing proportions to those cancers. So we're developing really a new class of pharmaceuticals based, as I said, on a massively biological agent which originated in nature, but now that we make fully synthetic as the only clinical grade drug of this sort in the world. It's applicable in a number of therapeutic areas based on these three targets of interest. You can see there, STAT3, NRF2 and SHP2. Do ask us more about those should you wish to during this webinar. There's a lot of published data here, both by ourselves and by third parties, preclinical and clinical data that helps us de-risk what we do. And we've got four target diseases in cancer and inflammation, and I'll elaborate a bit about those shortly. The thing that's unique about SFX01, our lead asset, is Sulforidex. That's our unique platform technology that stabilizes something that's normally highly unstable and requires storage at minus 20 degrees C. Now, with the Sulforidex stabilization technology, we can store our tablets in the fridge. A bit more about that later. We've got IP covering this technology, and it's strong, and much of it is granted, covering the composition, the methods of manufacturing, and also some IP on other derivatives of sulforaphane where the chemical structure has been modified. We've got a very highly experienced board and management. Many of us have been in this industry for 2 to 3 decades each. And our business model, harnessing all of this technology, is to really get to proof of concept, whatever that means, and partner. And because of that, multiple partnering opportunities, we've got a lot of shots at goal in the shape of inflection points. The next point, well, we'll elaborate on this a bit later, but we've currently got £9 million in cash as of the 31st of March this year, which is the close of our last reporting period. So our strategy then, proof of concept and partner. So we're exploiting our leading and patented technology in the science around sulforaphane. Our lead molecule, different diseases, different inflammatory diseases, and indeed cancers. And we've got a funded plan to deliver phase 2 clinical proof of concept in one very serious cancer. And then we look to out-license. We, for non-core indications, we'll think about early partnering where areas that are not completely aligned with our internal expertise. We've got a lot of academic partners and 1 or 2 commercial ones too. There's a compelling scientific rationale in a whole bunch of diseases, and we've got a number of leading academic institutions working with us, developing more data on a monthly basis, and again, a bit more about that later. But the business model, though, will also include broadening the pipeline, if it's appropriate, through acquisition and licensing of sulforaphane analogues, and indeed other molecules that might be complementary to what we're doing. There's the pipeline as it currently stands, and along the bottom there, you'll see a number of the academic institutions that we have been or are continuing to be actively involved with. We've got phase 2A positive data in metastatic breast cancer. We have an active glioblastoma program for which you will see some more news this year. We've got data, very interesting data in various hematological malignancies, including a rare pediatric cancer called JMML, or juvenile myelomonocytic leukemia. And we have rights to a bunch of analogues from another academic institution that we're currently assessing. These, of course, are analogues of sulforaphane. So this one's a busy slide. It's busy because there's a lot been going on. So in no particular chronological order, but last month we announced a new collaboration with the University of Michigan on bowel cancer. That's an area we haven't exploited very much to date, but the Michigan team are very keen on looking at SFXO1 in a specific model, on several models actually, of bowel cancer. The month before, we announced a new academic collaboration with a university in Rome, La Sapienza. They're looking at potential administration of SFXO1 and whether it radiosensitizes. It's a really interesting property potentially. That is, it makes the effect of radiation more powerful. And as most people know, radiation is a factor of most cancers at some point during the duration of that cancer. On the manufacturing front, between the last couple of years, we've scaled up our active ingredient production to commercial scale with a new provider, and we've made a number, it says a number there, we've made a huge number of process improvements. And that's led to us developing a brand new EC, enteric coated tablet. So we've got a new formulation made in a new manufacturing process, and this is as near commercial as we need to be at this point. So it's enteric coated. There's a special coat sprayed on the tablet to enable it to pass the acid of the stomach and release in the small intestine, where most drugs get released and where the most efficient uptake of sulforaphane into the bloodstream happens. So we've got this ready now to support our clinical trials that start later in the year. In metastatic breast cancer in March, we announced the expansion of an existing preclinical collaboration with the University of Manchester and the Manchester Breast Biology Centre. We're very close to the folks up the road there and at the Christie. We're generating data to optimize the way SFXO1 should be used in the next clinical trial in breast cancer treatment after we had positive phase 2A open label clinical data a couple of years ago. We've also been very busy with the regulatory authorities. So in January of this year, we received feedback from the FDA in the United States because we submitted for a pre-IND meeting. That's really us discussing with the FDA what we require in order to conduct clinical trials in the United States. And that feedback was largely positive, and we're already working on how we can answer the additional questions the FDA have asked us. And in September of last year, through a previous interaction with the FDA, we achieved orphan drug status in the United States for malignant glioma. That confers a number of benefits. As many people know, orphan drug gives you a tax break on eventual sales. It gives you additional intellectual property protection on the asset in the United States, and was our start of our serious interactions with the US regulator. We've been busy with the UK MHRA as well, and we received formal scientific advice from them at the beginning of this year that's now being built in to our clinical program. In October, we published some of our key glioma data, preclinical mouse glioma data from an academic collaborator we have in Italy, in d'Abruzzo in Italy. And that's available in the public domain, and there is a link on our website. Another collaboration with the Weatherall Institute in Oxford demonstrated, as I mentioned earlier, effectiveness in the test tube in a very rare and difficult to treat pediatric disease, that's JMML. Partnering continues with our partner JuveLife, a division of Juvenescence, and there's some reasonably chunky milestones due in that partnership as that agent approaches launch as a nutraceutical product. So to the outlook then, we will start on schedule our phase 1 PK/PD study. This is much more than a standard phase 1 volunteer study. We're combining evaluating the properties of our new enteric coated tablet in volunteers with what happens in the body once that sulforaphane gets released into the bloodstream. We will evaluate how we interact with our targets of interest. I mentioned at the beginning, that's SHP2, NRF2, and STAT3. We'll be measuring all of those things in the volunteers, and that is on schedule to start in the fourth quarter of this year. And we'll update the market, of course, with any results that are relevant and complete that come out of that study. Also, at the end of the year, we'll open our GBM, that's glioblastoma, patient study to recruitment. We're doing the final preclinical work now, and we're doing the planning work required to produce a compelling study in this devastating brain cancer that's been quite prominent in the press lately. In fact, yesterday was the World Glioblastoma Day. We made a couple of tweets there, but more importantly, the mid-stage phase 1b/2a trial that we are in deep planning and deep discussion with both regulators and with key opinion leaders will start right at the end of the year. It's a UK and continental Europe study from a site point of view, multi-center, multi-country. And it's a thing called an adaptive design. That is, we can adapt the design with the consent of the regulatory authorities and the investigators, depending on what we find. So the news flow looking forward then to 2023, we'll announce results of at least 4 of our preclinical collaborations, the 2 I mentioned earlier, plus a couple of others, including the Manchester Breast Centre. We'll be announcing the results of our volunteer study, that big PK/PD, pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic volunteer study, and any top-line results will come from the first part of our adaptive glioblastoma study in patients. So a lot of clinical news in the outlook for the next 12 months. And we're looking also to Juvenescence to launch towards the end of the year, and that will accompany a low 7-figure milestone to us on the launch of that nutraceutical. So a lot of news to come, perhaps even some more than this as well, and we will update the market as needed during the next 12 months or so. I wanted to give you a little bit more detail on these programs, and this whole slide deck will be available on our website shortly after this presentation. So we're doing on the blue, dark blue slide on top there, some in vivo additional studies in models of glioblastoma. Down the left-hand side, you'll see that we've approaching the end of our enteric-coated tablet CMC, chemistry, manufacturing controls program, refining our assays for assessing both sulforaphane and its metabolites, because sulforaphane is metabolites in the body, and there is quite a lot of information to say that those metabolites are also biologically active. And then we have our assay program in late stage completion. That is, what does the drug do when it gets into the body in model systems and indeed tissues taken from volunteers. So the red line shows the module 1 of our patient study. That's phase 0 to phase 1B. It's modular, so it will adapt and grow as we learn from the way the drug behaves in that disease. And that'll be in recurrent glioma, starting with monotherapy, looking for tolerability, pharmacodynamic interaction with targets, and then adding in standard of care as necessary. And then a healthy volunteer study, I think I've said more than enough about that. The deliverables are on the right-hand side. I think that's the most important point within Q4 2022, right through to the end of 2023. Our patient study will deliver some tumor PK, some proof of mechanism, proof of principle. We'll certainly get a lot of information about how well tolerated SFX01 is, and a bunch of other endpoints as well. Before that is delivered, we'll be also delivering, these are roughly in chronological order, the pharmacokinetic dynamic interaction of our drug in volunteers and how well tolerated it is as a new formulation. We're expecting better tolerability than previous formulations we've used, and it supports a lot of things, the oncology strategy and anything we do, again, in non-malignant disease. So I'll take a quick voice break now, hand over to Richard to give you a little bit more detail about our financial position. Richard.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everybody. P&L terms, the operating loss is 3.2 million and the post-tax loss is 2.7. Those are the same numbers when rounded to what we had in the previous year, and that's not me manipulating the figures. It's more a reflection of the level of activity in the last 2 years where we haven't been sponsoring our own trials. We have done different activities in the 2 years. In the year 21, we were doing a lot of toxicology work and transferring the CMC program from the US to Sterling in the UK, who we're using for scaling up. In the year just gone, we spent more time on preparing for the clinical trials and on actually manufacturing to scale and tableting the compound that we're going to use in the trials, SFX01, as in a tablet form. The cash flow was very similar, as you would expect, with a similar operating loss, 2.6 million versus 2.9 the prior year. But the difference is frankly just, it's partly down to the difference in cost for the share base. As you probably know, there's something called a share-based payment cost that is a non-cash item. But in this case, the 300,000 difference is mainly due to movements in working capital. So in other words, debt and credit are slightly different at the end of each year, which causes a cash flow effect. The cash at the end of last year, March 22, was 9 million. So overall, a reduction in 2.6 million in cash. And we expect that to last until Q4, into Q4 2023, before allowing for any milestones that we might get from Juvenescence or elsewhere. Now, that's obviously a faster rate of burn than in the prior years, and that reflects the fact that we're ramping up our clinical programs and we're manufacturing a larger batches of product to support those programs. So that is what you would expect. I think that's all I've got to say here on financials, so we can move on.
Thanks, Richard. So a quick reminder of the experienced team. I'm not going to dwell on this, but you can see these on our website. We've got a vastly experienced board and management team. We were all together at the AGM that occurred here in Alderley Park a little bit earlier on this afternoon, and we use some of the very best medical and scientific advisors in the world to advise us on these programs. So that more or less concludes our formal presentation as a result of our AGM, and we'll hand over now to questions. We've got some pre-submitted ones, and I can see a few coming in from the webinar platform, so we'll try and do as many of those as we possibly can.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed to you, Richard, for that update. Ladies and gentlemen, as you said, please do continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of the screen. But just while the team take a few moments to review those questions submitted today, I'd like to remind you the recording of the presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard. As you rightly said, we did receive several pre-submitted questions, and perhaps we can start the Q&A session with these. The first one reads as follows. Evgen has invested much management time to establish 15 academic collaborations. Can you expand on these?
Yeah, I mean, some of those are still ongoing, the majority, in fact, and some of them are already completed and the data already published. For example, we've published, as I mentioned, in October last year, a collaboration in models of glioblastoma that led us very strongly to that very difficult to treat and rapidly fatal cancer. That was published in a prestigious peer-reviewed journal towards the end of last year, in Q4, in fact. Before that, another academic collaboration we had with the University of Auckland generated some in vitro, that's in test tube data, in relatively fresh tissue from brain tumors, from glioblastoma tumors, and it also showed compelling efficacy in the test tube of SFX01. The Manchester Breast Centre collaboration we've got has continued for some years. We've, in fact, expanded it and invested more in it in this year. And we're very close to that. And the goal there is to really look in the post-CDK4/6, the post-palbociclib setting in ladies who develop metastatic breast cancer and where palbociclib shows resistance developing, where SFX01 is best used. So that's a little bit about our academic collaborations. The radiosensitization one I mentioned and the bowel cancer one I mentioned, those are our predominantly live collaborations now, and they will feature in our news flow in the next year or so.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. The next question we've got here is reads as follows. Dr. Jones, understanding the need to comply with obligations of confidentiality, please describe the effort being made in business development.
Yeah, well, our entire business model is predicated, of course, on business development, because we're not the sort of company that will take some innovation, develop it all the way through to the market and then launch it with a sales force. That's not our business model. Our business model is to take it to a certain point where larger organizations then want to take it on and take it all the way through large-scale phase 3 trials, the registration process, and on to marketing. So business development is critical to what we do. We've had for over 12 months a new chief business officer, and we've been very busy in the formal partnering meetings, both in Europe. They were mainly virtual in 2021, and indeed at the beginning of this year, where the JP Morgan and Biotech Showcase partnering events in San Francisco were held entirely virtual. We had 29 meetings at that partnering conference, really discussing our technology and indeed if there's any complementary technology we could bring into the company. And more recently, as some of you may have seen on another platform, we were at San Diego in the first face-to-face partnering conference post-COVID, and we held over 32 meetings in that partnering conference. It's a very productive one, the Bio San Diego or East Coast, sometimes alternating years. And we're following up on all those conversations now. I think a bit of patience is called for, though, because pharmaceutical partnering takes quite a bit of time. There's a bit of introduction. There's getting to learn about the asset on a non-confidential basis. If there's interest and appetite to do more, and we are signing CDAs currently, then we'll sign confidentiality agreements, and then the conversation continues about what each party are interested in. BD is absolutely key to everything we do other than research and development. It's an absolutely key platform. You can understand that I can't tell you more about discussions that may or may not be happening with whatever size company we're dealing with, but I can reassure the entire audience that there's a lot of activity on this front. It occupies a large chunk of the management's time.
Fantastic, thank you indeed. The penultimate question we have here is: could you expand on director and/or share staff share purchases? Apologies.
Yeah, I'll take this one. Yeah, we, as you might imagine, we're frequently asked this question by investors that we meet, and just by way of background, in the last couple of years, 2 directors bought shares in the last funding round, well, just over 2 years ago in 2021, year and a half actually, sorry. And a senior member of staff has bought shares in the market in the last 6 to 9 months. I can't remember exactly when they were bought. So there has been buying of shares by management and directors. Right now, we're not in a position to buy shares under stock exchange rules, but we do take the point that other people mentioned to us that the share price looks very attractive at the moment.
I wish we could. I really do.
So, yeah, there we go.
Fantastic, thank you, Richard. The final question we've got here is: why has James Kite been such a keen buyer over the last 12 months? Do you know his motive?
Well, we obviously have a good dialogue with James since we started buying shares. His precise motives, his precise reasons, these are obviously confidential between him and us, that it would not be ethical for us to put words in his mouth and tell other investors what he's doing. That is confidential. What we can say is that he's extremely enthused by the technology we have and the opportunities we have. And he has said to us, he has a very high regard for the management team and thinks it's a quality management team. So I say that to try and answer a question more than anything else. But he is definitely committed and he's enthusiastic about the company.
That's fantastic. That concludes the pre-submitted questions. If I may, as you can see, we've received a number of questions throughout today's presentation. If I could just ask you just to click on that Q&A tab, perhaps start at the top of the list, and where appropriate to do so, if you could just read out the question and give your response, please.
Sure. There's 2 linked questions about the potential for the business and timescales, and what does success look like? And they're very good questions. Thank you for those. So the potential of the business is measured in generating good clinical data from this point on. We've got an extremely talented team of consultants and staff preparing for those clinical trials I described earlier. Success looks like generating good PK/PD data in volunteers, showing that the drug gets in reliably, interacts with targets of interest. We're very confident that those all are going to happen. So success, and we should get reward, because biotech companies generally get rewarded for good quality clinical data. So success in the short term looks like a good PK/PD study in volunteers, followed by some good readouts of positive trends in seriously ill glioblastoma patients in 2023. Biotech timescales are measured along relatively long periods, as you know. So a 2023 win for us would be positive data in glioblastoma, having already understood exactly how our new tablet behaves in volunteers, and then we can transition to giving it to seriously ill people. Timescales, I'm afraid I can't comment on. I mean, you know what our plans are clinically. We expect to open our volunteer study in Q4 and our GBM study at the end of the year, and then generate data throughout 2023. So watch this space for the next year and a half is probably the summary of that one. We've got another one which is linked perhaps about And thanks again. Catalysts and milestones, you can expect to highlight the progress. I'll do the first part of that question first and maybe deal with the second one second, because it's a two-part question. I think we've explained pretty clearly, we don't publish exact clinical milestones. There are lots of moving parts that are currently going on. That is making and packaging tablets to pharmaceutical standard. It's happening right now. It is interacting with the regulatory authorities on the exact design of these studies, getting ethical committee approvals for these studies. It's all in hand and all going to plan, and then opening the study for recruitment once all those approvals are in hand. And we said that happens for a volunteer study at the beginning of Q4, and in our patient study in brain cancer at the end of Q4. So the catalysts for us are really those opening of the studies in not many months' time now, actually. There's an awful lot of running around this office happening, getting all that ready. The other one is what, if anything, can speed up development. I can honestly say we're going as fast as it is possible to do so in biotechnology at this moment. The planning phase is coming to an end. In parallel to the planning phase, we've been making drug to the full pharmaceutical standard, getting buy-in for the regulatory authorities for our plans, and then executing those plans in making drugs, designing studies, getting the key opinion leaders in the world backing for those studies, finding centers in the UK and Europe who are prepared to conduct our patient study. All of that is well in hand, and then hitting the market, the study market that is, with those drugs when the requisite approvals have been achieved. So again, watch the space for 2023 when this data, this rich and well-prepared data plan starts delivering real volunteer and patient data. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, there's another question here why it took us 6 weeks to update shareholders on the results of that we announced in June. I think very simply, we felt it was more helpful, more appropriate to do it on the day of the AGM. We had our AGM earlier this afternoon. Generally, there is a presentation given at an AGM. Usually this is done to the audience at the AGM, which today was pretty low. And we felt that it made sense to combine comment on the year that's just gone with the AGM that we've just held.
Now, there's a question here about our nutraceutical partner that I'm afraid we can't really give you any detail on. I mean, you're talking about whether they were intending to go public and had said so. And the honest answer is we can't comment, because that's the business of an entirely separate company with an entirely separate management and board. All I can tell you is that our relations are very good and very strong, and we're working together on the Sulforidex-based product that they've licensed from us.
Yeah. Should we do? I think we can do this one, can't we?
Yeah. There's another subsidiary question about what good looks like. Good looks like good clinical data from now on. We are on track. If I answer that question a year ago, I'd have given you exactly the same answer. Actually, good looks like a well thought out plan. This is not easy medicine to develop in, but a well thought out plan maximizes the chance of success. I'd have given you the same answer. Good quality clinical data in a well thought out clinical experiment, which is what we've been working on the entirety of the year.
Should I talk to the share price? I mean, there was a question about why the share price has gone down by 60%. Why do we think that is? There are a couple of reasons here. I think the first is, since we did the raise, the trial in COVID reported, and as you'll be aware, sadly it didn't get the positive data we wanted, in common with about 95% of trials in COVID. And that, given that was an opportunistic trial in the first place, we didn't have to pay for it, we didn't have to run it. It was a purely upside trial. It was disappointing that when it came out that it hadn't worked, the share price dropped by a significant, probably about half actually. So a big chunk of the share price reduction is due to a trial that was only ever opportunistic and potentially, we did our bit in COVID. We felt we should. We had a molecule that looked like it might work. In reality, the patients that came into the trial were too ill to respond to the sort of drug we have. It was always going to be a really difficult trial to succeed in. So whilst it was disappointing, it hasn't affected anything, our core programs and the work, our focus, but sadly it did hit the share price. I think the other element following the decline from that is, as anyone who's looked at AIM in particular or biotech stocks worldwide, and certainly on NASDAQ, the market sentiment towards biotech has gone from a high in 2020 to a low at the moment, and share prices across the board in our sector have declined very substantially because it's always a bit of a cyclical. Share prices for biotech companies are always a bit cyclical, and at the moment we're at a real low, and that's a market reaction, we believe, rather than anything that we have or haven't done since the fundraise.
We've got a question here, and I think this is probably the last question we've got time for, about our interactions with investors, and the answer to this is really simple. We absolutely adhere to the rules of the stock market in all our investor communications. Everybody gets the same information. Nobody gets any preferential information. That's the law. That's the rules of the market, and we absolutely stick to that. So nobody gets anything special here. Everybody gets the same information set. Yeah, and this is available publicly to you now this afternoon, and nobody else gets anything more.
We are scrupulous about this. Neither of us wants to end up in jail, frankly.
So with that sort of slightly somber point, that we are absolutely rigorous and have been in both our 30-year careers in the public and private markets about information. I hope you've enjoyed the information we've presented to you today. We're excited about the progress in the clinic that we're going to push towards the end of the year. We're excited about our business development activities. More on that when we can conclude transactions around our asset, and we're excited in general about the plan and the financial support we've received from our shareholders.
That's fantastic, Hugh. Richard, thank you indeed for addressing those questions from investors. Of course, any further questions that do come through, you will have the ability to review those, and we'll publish responses where appropriate to do so on the Investor Meet Company platform. Hugh, I was going to ask you for a few closing comments, but I think we've just had those, so thank you indeed for updating us. What we'll do now is just redirect investors to give you some feedback, if that's okay. Again, thank you very much indeed for updating attendees today. Could I please ask attendees not to close this session? You should be automatically redirected to provide your feedback in order the team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete and is greatly appreciated by the company. On behalf of FGen Pharma PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That concludes today's session. Thank you and good afternoon to you all.
Thank you.